When experts discover an old photo of what appears to be three friends from 1899, it seems like just another piece of frontier history. But when appraiser Dr. John Thorne is asked to zoom in, he sees an impossible detail that leaves him speechless and unravels a 125-year-old murder mystery. Dr. John Thorne had spent 15 years authenticating Western artifacts, but nothing in his career prepared him for what he'd find in lot number 47 of the prestigious Legends of the West auction. The Denver auction house had acquired the estate of a recently deceased Wyoming rancher, and among the dusty boxes of memorabilia was a single photograph. The high-resolution scan showed three weathered men posed outside a log cabin. All three held rifles, their faces bearing the hard-earned lines of frontier life. On the back, someone had scrawled in faded ink, "Hunters, Wyoming Territory, 1899. At first glance, it seemed like countless other frontier photographs, stoic men documenting their lives in an unforgiving landscape. But John's trained eye was drawn to details others might miss. As he zoomed in to examine the Winchester rifle held by the man on the right, his breath caught in his throat. Etched into the rifle's stock was an unmistakable silver wire inlay, a serpent eating its own tail, rendered in intricate detail. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the kind of custom work that cost more than most men earned in a year. But it wasn't the artistry that made John's hands tremble and lost for words as he reached for his reference files. He'd seen this exact mark before, in case files from the Territorial Marshal's office. It was the signature of U.S. Marshal Everett Vance's custom Winchester, a rifle that had been reported stolen from his murdered body over a century ago. John immediately pulled every available record on Marshal Vance's death. The official case file painted a grim picture of frontier justice gone wrong. On October 15th, 1899, Marshal Vance had been ambushed while transporting a prisoner along a remote Wyoming trail. Both the marshal and his prisoner were found shot dead 3 days later by a passing cavalry patrol. The crime scene suggested a professional ambush. Vance's horse had been found nearby, unharmed but riderless. His badge, wallet, and that distinctive custom rifle had all vanished. The territorial authorities quickly attributed the murders to the notorious Red Creek Gang, a group of outlaws who had been terrorizing the region for months. But the Red Creek Gang was never apprehended. Despite extensive manhunts and substantial bounties, they seemed to vanish into the vast Wyoming wilderness. The case officially went cold within 6 months, joining dozens of other unsolved frontier murders in the territorial files. Now, 125 years later, that missing rifle had apparently surfaced in a photograph. But something didn't add up. If this was evidence of the crime, why would the perpetrators pose so casually for a formal portrait? The contradiction gnawed at John as he studied every detail of the image. Examining the photograph's margins with a magnifying glass, John spotted something he'd initially missed, a small embossed logo in the bottom right corner. It showed a raven perched on what appeared to be a camera lens, rendered in intricate detail despite its tiny size. Arthur Pemberton, the auction house's semi-retired archivist, had worked with Western photographs for over 40 years. When John showed him the mark, Arthur's weathered face lit up with recognition. "Albert the Raven Finch," Arthur said. "Now there's a name I haven't heard in years." Finch was one of the most skilled frontier photographers of his era, but also one of the most eccentric. He believed that photography was a form of spiritual capture, that he was preserving souls, not just images. Arthur explained that Finch's obsession with the metaphysical aspects of photography led him to document every single photograph he took. Unlike other frontier photographers who worked quickly and moved on, Finch kept meticulous logs. When each photo was taken, who was in it, why they wanted it taken, and what he observed about their spiritual state. "If this is one of Finch's photographs," Arthur continued, "then somewhere there's a record of exactly who these men were and when this was taken. Finch's logs are housed at the University of Wyoming. His great-niece donated them about 20 years ago. The university's archives were a treasure trove of frontier history, and Finch's logs were exactly as Arthur had described, obsessively detailed records of every photograph he'd taken across 3 decades of frontier life. It took John 2 full days of searching through dusty volumes before he found the entry that made his heart race. October 18th, 1899. Photograph commissioned by the 3 friends at their workshop cabin, 15 miles northwest of Laramie. Present, Silas, Jebediah, and Caleb Kane. A quick genealogical search through territorial records revealed the connection that changed everything. Caleb Kane was Marshall Everett Vance's younger brother. The revelation hit John like a physical blow. Marshall Vance's real name had been Everett Vance Kane. Like many lawmen of the era, he'd shortened his name for professional purposes. Armed with this new information, John dove into local newspaper archives. What he found painted a picture of family discord that had played out very publicly in the weeks before the Marshals' death. The Laramie Boomerang had covered the story extensively. The Kane family had inherited a substantial ranch from their father, but Everett had wanted to sell it to invest in railroad development. His younger brother, Caleb, wanted to keep the land and expand the cattle operation. The dispute had escalated into very public shouting matches in town, with witnesses reporting threats and bitter recriminations. "You're dead to me, Caleb," Marshall Vance had been quoted as saying after one particularly heated argument outside the bank. You're no family of mine." The final newspaper mention came just 5 days before the Marshals' murder. "The Kane family dispute continues to divide our community. Marshall Vance has reportedly stated he will contest the inheritance in territorial court, while his brother vowed to protect the family legacy at any cost." Suddenly, the photograph looked less like innocent hunters and more like a confession. The timing was too perfect, the family connection too damning. Had Caleb and his friends killed Marshall Vance over a land dispute? Determined to build a complete case, John began researching the backgrounds of Caleb and his friends, expecting to find evidence of criminal activity or violent tendencies. Instead, he discovered something that completely upended his theory. The territorial records showed that the three friends were registered bounty hunters, and exceptionally successful ones. Over the previous 3 years, they had brought in over 30 wanted criminals, collecting bounties totaling nearly $15,000. Their reputation for tracking skills and marksmanship was well documented in law enforcement records. More importantly, their work had put them firmly on the side of territorial law enforcement. They had worked directly with Marshall Vance on several occasions, helping him track down fugitives in the vast Wyoming wilderness. Several commendation letters in the territorial files praised their professionalism and effectiveness. But it was a specific entry in the territorial courthouse records that shattered John's theory entirely. On October 15th, 1899, the exact day of Marshall Vance's murder, Silas, Jebediah, and Caleb had collected a $500 bounty for bringing in Black Pete Morrison, a cattle rustler they'd tracked to a hideout near Cheyenne. The courthouse records were signed by 3 different officials and witnessed by a dozen townspeople. The timing was ironclad. The brothers had been 300 miles away from the murder scene, with dozens of witnesses to prove it. John stared at the contradictory evidence spread across his desk. The 3 friends, especially Caleb, had a clear motive to kill his brother. They possessed the skills and knowledge to plan the perfect ambush. The photograph seemed to show them with the murder weapon a month or so after the crime, but they also had the most solid alibi imaginable. They were in another town, in front of witnesses, doing their legitimate job at the exact time of the murder. Frustrated but determined, John decided to map out the friends' entire bounty hunting career. If they weren't the killers, perhaps their records would reveal some other connection to the case. What he found was another puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture he'd been building. The friends' bounty hunting records showed remarkable consistency. From 1896 to 1899, they brought in wanted criminals every 2 to 3 weeks like clockwork. Their longest gap between captures had been 12 days, and that was during a particularly harsh winter when travel was nearly impossible. But starting on October 16, 1899, the day after Marshall Vance's murder, their professional activity simply stopped. No bounties collected, no wanted posters filed, no communications with territorial authorities. For 2 full months, the most prolific bounty hunting team in Wyoming Territory went completely silent. Their work resumed on December 20th, 1899, just 3 days after Albert Finch took their photograph. They immediately returned to their previous pattern of regular captures, continuing their successful career for several more years before retiring to ranch work. The professional hiatus made no sense from a financial perspective. The brothers had been earning substantial money from their bounty work, far more than they could make from any other frontier occupation. To simply stop working for 2 months, right at the peak of their success, was completely irrational, unless they had been working on something else entirely. something that required all their tracking skills and knowledge of criminal behavior, but wasn't part of their official duties. 3 weeks into his investigation, John was ready to present his findings to Julia Morrison, the auction house director. The story was compelling but incomplete, full of tantalizing connections that didn't quite add up to a coherent narrative. "Dr. Thorne," Julia said, standing in his office doorway with her arms crossed, "I've been hearing that you've been spending considerable time on what should have been a routine authentication. Care to explain?" John spread his research across the conference table. Newspaper clippings, bounty records, the photograph, genealogical charts, and courthouse documents. "The rifle in this photograph belonged to a murdered U.S. Marshal," he began. "The 3 men are friends, with the one on the right being his estranged brother, someone who had both the motive and the opportunity to kill him. However, all 3 have a solid alibi for the time of the murder." Julia studied the materials with the sharp eye of someone who'd been in the auction business for 20 years. "So what's your conclusion?" "I think they were working outside the law," John said. "They couldn't have committed the murder because they were 300 miles away, but look at this gap in their bounty hunting work. 2 months where they just disappeared from all official records. I think they were tracking the real killers." "That's quite a leap," Julia said skeptically. "Based on what evidence?" John zoomed in on a detail he'd been studying for days. A shape sitting calmly beside Silas Kane in the photograph. Higher resolution revealed it was actually an animal. "That's a dog," John said, pointing to the barely visible shape. "A bloodhound, from the look of the ears and posture." Julia squinted at the image. "So they had a hunting dog. That's hardly unusual." "But this isn't just any dog," John continued, pulling out another document. "I found Marshal Vance's personal effects inventory. He owned a bloodhound named Tracker, described as unusually loyal, follows no commands except from Marshal Vance, refuses food from strangers." He showed Julia a newspaper clipping from 1898. Marshal Vance's bloodhound, Tracker, has assisted in 17 captures over the past year. The animal is noted for its exceptional loyalty and its refusal to work with anyone except the Marshal himself. "After the murder, Tracker disappeared," John explained. "The cavalry patrol that found the bodies reported no sign of the Marshal's dog. Everyone assumed it had been killed or had run off into the wilderness." Julia leaned forward, studying the photograph more intently. "You're saying this is the same dog?" "Look at its posture," John said. "It's not cowering or alert like a wild animal would be. It's sitting calmly, completely relaxed. This is a dog that knows and trusts these men, and given its legendary loyalty to Marshal Vance, the implication hung in the air between them. The brothers' public fight with Everett didn't matter when family was actually murdered," John said, his voice gaining confidence as the pieces fell into place. "Blood runs thicker than water, especially on the frontier where family was often all you had." He pointed to the timeline he'd constructed. They were doing their regular bounty hunting work when the murder happened. That's their alibi. But the moment they learned Caleb's brother was dead, they dropped everything else. No more official bounties, no more working with territorial authorities. "They went off book," Julia said, understanding dawning in her voice. "Exactly. They used their tracking skills, their knowledge of criminal behavior, their contacts in the outlaw community, everything that made them successful bounty hunters, to track down the Red Creek gang themselves. Not for money, not for official recognition, but for family justice." John showed her the photograph again, but now every detail told a different story. "This isn't a trophy photo of killers. It's a memorial photo of men who've completed a mission. Look at their faces. They're not celebrating. They're exhausted, relieved. And the dog proves it," Julia added. "If they had killed Marshal Vance, his legendary loyal bloodhound would never have accepted them. But if they avenged his death, Tracker would recognize them as family," John finished. "The dog's presence and behavior in this photograph is the strongest evidence that these men were on the right side of justice. The rifle," he explained, "wasn't stolen evidence of a crime. It was a recovered family heirloom. The brothers had probably taken it from the Red Creek gang after tracking them down, returning their murdered brother's most prized possession to family hands where it belonged." The auction house immediately postponed the sale while John documented his findings. The story was too important to rush, and the historical implications were too significant to ignore. Working with historians from the University of Wyoming and the Wyoming State Archives, John spent another month verifying every detail of his theory. Additional research uncovered supporting evidence. Reports of Red Creek gang members found dead in remote locations during the winter of 1899 to 1900. Descriptions matching the three friends seen in various frontier towns during their supposed hiatus, and most conclusively, a diary entry from a Cheyenne saloon keeper mentioning them asking questions about the Red Creek gang, looking like men with nothing left to lose. The auction catalog was completely rewritten. Instead of selling a mysterious frontier photograph, they were now offering a piece of American justice. Documented proof of a family's loyalty that transcended bitter personal disputes. The lot, including the rifle, photograph, and John's complete research documentation, sold for $847,000 to the Museum of Western Justice in Tombstone, Arizona. The record-breaking price reflected not just the historical significance of the items, but the power of the story they told. In the end, a dusty photo of three friends from 1899 did more than identify a rifle. It revealed how family bonds can survive even the worst feuds. What hidden stories of loyalty and justice might be waiting in your own family's old photographs? Let us know your thoughts below. If you love uncovering forgotten histories like this one, make sure you subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories. We'll catch you in the next one.